Do you love charts and tables and tables and charts and charts and tables? If so, then the many fabulous tabletop role-playing games from the 1980s might be right for you. I'm your host, Atten, here at We Love TTRPGs, and this is the much longer than it needed to be and overly detailed video that nobody asked for about 2nd edition Gumworld. But hey, don't worry. It has chapters. Yay! I'm really happy you're here because this video will change you. This video is going to have you forgetting all about that other game with the big winged lizards in the dark underground places. Now, at this point, Gumworld is a tad dated, but it's still one of my favorite role-playing games. Wizards of the Coast is making yet another in a long line of bad business decisions by not marketing its own current version of this game, perhaps based on the 5e rules. Before you click off the video, I'm not really here to convince you to play 2nd edition Gumworld. I am, however, hoping that after watching this, you'll be inspired to try out one of the other mini modern retro clones that recapture the brilliance of this game. In fact, while I'm not one to repeat unconfirmed rumors, I have heard there's some French nerd on YouTube developing a game of his own with a similar genre. Now, of course, that's just a rumor, and like everything else you see on the internet, you should probably fact check this for yourself. I'll provide a link to his YouTube channel in this video's description. Though I'll be discussing the game's 2nd edition, and I really mean this, you'll be missing out if you don't put down your D&D books. Pay close attention to this video and go find one of the most recent retro clones currently available for the game. I mean, sword and sorcery fantasy is great, but nothing can really compare to the fun of a post-apocalyptic role-playing game full of killer robots and mutant monsters. For clarity, this isn't hard science. This is epic gonzo science fantasy. Even game designer Tim Kaine listed Gumworld among his many influences found in film, games, literature for the creation of his Fallout franchise. Last year, I made a video about the 1st edition of Gumworld. It's a good game, but frankly, that version is more like a collection of incomplete design notes for a role-playing game, while the 2nd edition is that completed final game. The 2nd edition is not without its flaws, and could have been laid out much better, but it's still a major improvement over its predecessor. They're essentially the same game, but strangely missing, though, are details regarding the game's setting's backstory, dropping only a few terms that explain nothing if you haven't read the previous edition. 2nd edition merely says, the Gumworld is a terrifying place, hardly recognizable to those familiar with the America that existed before the social wars of the early 24th century destroyed world civilization. To the inhabitants of North America in 2450, the time before the social wars is called the Shadow Years, since so little is known of it. Even the specific events that destroyed their nation are all but forgotten by these new Americans. Legends persist, of course, but the truth of those legends may never be known. The worldwide Holocaust simply wiped out too much. Lasers, atomic warheads, chemical and biological agents, and geological weapons all did their terrible work. Oceans boiled, continents buckled, the skies blazed with the light of unholy energies. By the time the violence subsided, the very face of the earth had changed. Much of North America, including most of Florida and the low-lying Gulf area, California, and parts of the eastern seaboard were underwater. Mountains had fallen. Rivers that had been tamed for 500 years careened wildly through the ruins of broken dams. Not a single city remained intact. The Black Years descended on the land of the free. That introduction retcons some of the 1st edition's backstory, but so you aren't required to watch my first Gumworld video, I'll recap by saying a terrorist organization known as the Apocalypse demanded world peace. And when those demands were not met, the terrorists unleashed the world-ending Holocaust, which ultimately resulted in the Gumworld, successor to planet Earth. It is now the year 2471, approximately 150 years since the end of those terrible civilization-ending wars known as the Shadow Years. As a player, you now live in the age called the Black Years. From the introduction to the 2nd edition rulebook, journey now into the far future where life is both dangerous and exciting, where those who lived before the 24th century are called the Ancients and are regarded with awe for their dimly understood art and science, where the wonders of man's highest technology exist side by side with the stone axe and the coat of chainmail, where exotic mutations abound and strange new powers of the mind shape human life, Journey now to the Gamma world. The rulebook begins with a few common terms and a brief explanation of roleplay. There's one extremely important paragraph found on page 3 that is not unique to this game and still applies to literally every TTRPG you will ever play. It says, "These rules are only a framework for your imagination. They are not the final word on how to play, but merely a guide to get you started. The more you play, the less you will need these rules." The great thing about social media offering so much gaming advice is for all of the useful tips you could potentially learn from experienced game masters and players. The bad thing, and this can't possibly be overstated, is how all of that advice injects a degree of poison into the hobby by creating a deceptive and largely unhelpful uniformity of thought, which suggests there's a right way and a wrong way to play. This often gets ignored, but for every cup of poison WotC pours into the hobby, Reddit is pouring in buckets. Back to the rulebook, we are now given player character choices. Though this selection will expand to include robots and plants in later editions, for now, we have just 3 options. We may be a pure strain human, a humanoid, or a mutated animal. Pure strain humans are people who possess no identifiable mutations, if any at all. They look just like the human beings from before the Shadow Years. They may defend, but may not attack in mental combat. They have higher than average intelligence, charisma, constitution, and hit points than humanoids and mutated animals. They have a better chance of figuring out the workings of ancient technology, and this includes the use of ancient medical equipment. They will be recognized and might even be obeyed by ancient robots and security systems if the GM so wishes. Additionally, they won't normally be attacked by robots except those that are malfunctioning or those specifically designed for military or security purposes. Cybernetic installations and think tanks, not programmed to injure humans, might even offer assistance when appropriate, and they don't suffer mutations from any source during normal gameplay. Humanoids. These are the distant human ancestors, but they've developed one or more mutations, making them very different from pre-Holocaust human stock. They might possess numerous physical and/or mental mutations. If they do not have any noticeable physical mutations, robots, security systems, and other artificial intelligences incapable of biological scanning may mistake them for pure strain humans. Humanoids may suffer from new mutations during play as a result of exposure to radiation or biogenetic agents. And mutated animals. These are usually intelligent beings mutated from pre-Holocaust animal stock. The powers of mutated animals will vary with the type of animal and the extent of its mutation. Players electing to play animals must choose first the basic animal stock as the ancestor of their character. All mutated animals begin with human intelligence. This does not count as a mutation and shouldn't be confused with the heightened intelligence mutation. After determining the base animal from which the character is descended, players must roll for the character's mutations in the same way as for humanoids. It is suggested that Game Master limit the base animal to those of roughly typical human size. A party of bipedal mutated barbarian elephants could present significant game balance problems, but there is no absolute rule against it. Next, for each of the 6 characteristics, players roll 4 6-sided dice, and for every species other than pure strain human, you drop the lowest number and add the remaining 3. This is done for mental strength, intelligence, dexterity, charisma, constitution, and physical strength. However, if your character is a pure strain human, you do not ignore the low die roll when rolling for intelligence, charisma, and constitution. Instead, add all 4 dice together. But constitution cannot naturally exceed 18, while intelligence and charisma may not exceed a score of 21. Anything above those numbers is simply ignored. Now, just like any other TTRPG, players record the final scores on their character sheets in the appropriate spaces. These 6 characteristics are essentially the same as those used in Dungeons & Dragons, with the one exception being mental strength. Mental strength is used to determine the outcome of mental combat. It is also used when determining the range, duration, and other characteristics of some mental mutations. This edition introduced an often overlooked mechanic for attribute checks. These are used to determine the outcome for attempting tasks that have some chance of failure. Breaking down doors and walking narrow ledges are 2 examples given in the rules. The Game Master decides which characteristic is appropriate, and the player must roll percentile die. The percentile die must be equal to or below the characteristic times a number, often 1 to 5, as determined by the GM. As a rule, the harder the task, the lower the multiplier. For example, a character with a dexterity of 10 attempting to walk across an extremely difficult tightrope might have a multiplier of only 1, indicating a 10% chance of success. That same character walking across a narrow bridge with a multiplier of 5 would have a 50% chance of success. The GM is given no further guidance on how or when to use this mechanic. We are told the maximum distance a character can leap is equal to 1/3 of their dexterity in meters, rounding up. The highest they can jump is 1/10 their dexterity in meters, again rounding up. Hit points. Unlike many other role-playing games that rely on levels or ranks to determine the amount of damage a character may sustain before perishing, typically through an abstraction called hit points, the second edition of Gamworld, just like its predecessor, uses the character's constitution score. This score is used to determine the number of dice rolled to generate a character's hit points. To find your character's hit point score, roll a number of 6-sided dice equal to the character's constitution, if the character is a humanoid or mutated animal. If your character is a pure strain human, you instead roll 8-sided dice equal to the character's constitution score. Now add the results together. The total is the number of hit points the character has. Constitution is also used to determine the effects of radiation, poison, and biogenetic weapons. It is also used to determine whether or not a character is knocked unconscious. Did I mention that Gamworld is a deadly game? Constitution is not a dump stat. Mutations. If the player's character is a mutant, they roll 1d4 twice. The first result indicates the number of physical mutations, and the second result indicates the number of mental mutations. To determine the exact nature of each mutation, roll percentile die and add your character's constitution score for determining physical mutations, or intelligence score for mental mutations. Find the result of your total on the appropriate column on the PC mutation table. Now write the name of each physical mutation in the physical mutation space on the character sheet, and that of each mental mutation in the mental mutation space. A description of each mutation is found in the mutation description section. At this point, you may need to alter your character's attribute scores to reflect the effects of one or more mutations. Mutations are much better described in this second edition, and are in fact formatted much like spells from AD&D of that era. Here's heat generation from first edition, compared to heat generation from second edition. Mutations might be very helpful, or very bad. From extra limbs with poisonous claws and increased strength, to mental powers that generate devastating psychic attacks. But it is also possible to end up with an unplayable character that has no limbs, with feet growing out of their eye sockets. In this case, a GM would instruct you to create a new character. Starting gear. Now that you've finished generating your beginning character, you'll need to roll 4d4 and multiply the result by 10. This is the character's number of gold coins available to spend on weapons, armor, and equipment. The rules say the basic monetary unit in post-Holocaust America is the gold piece, a 10-ounce coin minted in a variety of shapes and sizes. In addition, the domar, the basic unit of exchange before the Black Years, is also widely used, since it is almost impossible to counterfeit. And domars are plastic discs of uniform size and shape. Their color was once used to indicate value, but all domars are now treated as having the same value, regardless of color. Each gold piece is usually worth 5 domars. However, a large influx of domars in an area will increase the relative value of gold pieces. Precious metals and gemstones are the main mediums of exchange other than gold and domars, but they are used only in local economies. Barter remains the prime trade method in many areas. The GM will inform the players of their starting settlement's tech level. This will dictate what gear is available for purchase. There are 3 beginning tech levels, but most player characters will come from a small, primitive tech level 1 community. The rules tell us that nearly 50% of all Gamworld populations are reduced to living in tech level 1 societies. Optionally, characters may try to buy items of 1 or 2 tech levels higher than that of their starting community. Availability is determined by the GM, either by choice or die roll. Appearing on page 39 in text regarding general equipment, The rules tell us that a bedroll isn't needed, but characters without one must rest for 150% of the normal time to gain any benefit from resting. Once your character is all geared up, you're ready to begin your adventures and into the deadly wilderness and beyond. Time and distance. Game time is kept track of in turns, and there are 3 measurements used in the game. Each has a different purpose and covers a different sequence of events. The players will switch back and forth between the 3 different types of turns throughout the game. The march turn is a unit of game time that equals 4 hours. These are used when the PCs wish to cover a lot of ground or rest. Next is the search turn. Search turns are useful when PCs wish to examine their surroundings, figure out how an artifact works, heal their wounds, interact with non-combative NPCs, or perform similar actions. A search turn lasts 10 minutes, and there are 24 search turns for each march turn, 6 per hour. Finally, there are action turns. An action turn represents 10 seconds of game time. There are 60 action turns in a search turn. An action turn is used when the characters encounter a hazard or are otherwise threatened. If the PCs are in immediate danger or are interacting with combative NPCs or other dangerous encounters, the passage of time is measured in action turns. And action turns lead us directly into combat. This is a simplified overview of basic combat. For now, this is just the most used rules to resolve violent confrontations. There's cover modifiers, ability score modifiers, and a few other rules including vehicle combat. There's also rules for morale, and in Gamma World, NPCs may attempt to flee if combat is going poorly. Really, this deserves its own complete video, which I might do at some time later. There's several paragraphs devoted to NPC reactions to determine if a newly encountered group will be hostile or not. I rarely use that and made choices for the NPCs myself. However, if the GM wishes to leave it entirely to chance, those rules are fine, and they work well with unplanned random encounters. Characters may also attempt to negotiate. There's a chart for that, based on charisma and other modifiers. Any character who tries to negotiate can do nothing else during the rest of their turn. The GM may decide the NPC reactions or use the rules for reaction checks. And though I find no mention of it anywhere else in the rules, the example of play says that some game masters may wish their players to elect a caller. This is a very old school term which arose from wargaming and conventions. The caller is a player who communicates the group's questions and desires to the GM. Some GMs use a caller. Others prefer to let the players express their individual desires. If you wish to learn more about the caller, I'll have a link in this video's description. Combat uses action turns and group initiative. However, first the GM must determine surprise and the distance between the combatants. If all parties in the area are already aware of one another, this step is skipped. If surprise is possible, a surprise check is rolled. Have the players with the highest dexterity roll 1d6, while the GM rolls for each NPC group. Some GMs may choose to roll surprise for the PCs as well, which I think is rules as written, but I feel that's bad for the game. Surprise typically occurs on a result of 1 or 2. The rules also state that careless and quick-moving characters might have an increased chance of being surprised. A well-prepared ambush might modify this as well. Additionally, dexterity can modify the result. Slow characters are more likely to be surprised, while the opposite is true of those with higher scores. Any result other than a 1 or 2 has no effect. An initiative is rolled normally. To put it bluntly, surprised characters are pretty screwed. They lose that turn. They can't even defend themselves, and they're automatically hit. No to-hit die roll is needed. If attacked while surprised, surprised characters can't even try to negotiate, so begging for your life isn't even possible. After surprise has been resolved, remaining survivors may then determine combat actions. As previously stated, Gamma World uses group initiatives, and this is done by rolling 1d6. Remember, if a party is surprised, that party automatically loses their turn, and they do not roll for initiative. Surprised groups take no actions. The only exception is when all sides are surprised. Then every group rolls for initiative, but all actions are considered to have taken place simultaneously. The character with the highest dexterity score always rolls for the entire group's initiative. Each die roll is modified by dexterity. The rolling player adds 1 for each point of dexterity above 15. The group with the highest result moves first. Reroll ties. Whoever controls the character with initiative announces their intended actions. For initiative within a group, I use each character's individual dexterity to determine order. Combat actions are broken into 6 basic categories. Each PC and NPC in combat may choose one of 6 different combat actions. During the 6-second action turn, each participant may choose movement, throwing or firing weapons, striking with physical weapons, reloading or changing weapons, using a mutation, or other actions, which is anything else not already specified. This might include jabbing a needle with a poison antidote, or kicking down a door, for example. If you choose combat, we have mental mutations and physical combat. Each chart works basically the same. Find your attacker's strength and cross-reference that against the defender. For example, mental attack strength versus the defender's mental strength. Or for physical attacks, this chart is used. Use either the attacker's weapon class versus the defender's armor class, or for unarmed combat, typically used when fighting beasts, use the attacker's hit dice versus defender's armor class. Add all bonuses and modifiers. Then the attacker rolls 1d20 to see if the attack succeeds. If the attack fails, nothing happens. If it succeeds, determine the appropriate damage as indicated by the form of attack. When a character hits an enemy in physical combat with a cutting, stabbing, or slashing weapon, or a natural weapon, the damage is modified by the attacker's physical strength. For each point above 15, 1 is added to the total. For each point below 6, 1 point is subtracted. The damage cannot be modified by more than 6 in this fashion. Powered weapons and weapons that are fired are not modified in this manner, but thrown weapon damage is. Now here's a really weird sentence tucked away in the combat rules. It says that the GM may wish to let players roll the dice for their own attacks, but this will make it harder for the GM to fudge, alter results if he wants. Wait, hold on. The game actually suggests cheating as an option? And there's a rule called the dying stroke. This states that a character might be killed during combat before they had a chance to attack. When this happens, the GM may give the dead character a dying stroke. That is, the victim might be allowed to make their attack roll if their group gets the initiative, even though they were technically killed when the other party attacked. A dying stroke should only be allowed if the total damage inflicted on that character by the blow that killed him was less than 150% of the character's remaining hit points. This rule reflects the speed at which combat occurs and the fact that all attacks are really taking place at essentially the same time. Things like initiative rolls serve to preserve order at the gaming table. Monsters. Gamma World adversaries are just too much fun. You have mutated animals roaming the wilderness, like the deadly, evil, bipedal, gun-toting bunny rabbit marauders, the 9-foot-tall canine warriors, the mutated badgers, raccoons, giant spiders, and lizards, deadly vegetation, some of which has gained sentience, and of course robots from the ancients. Add to that the many natural hazards found while exploring the radiation, bizarre weather conditions, and so on. Literally anything you might imagine. Among the population of the Gamma World, some creatures have formed into Cryptid Alliances. These are factions that operate under a unified belief in their cause, which is often at the expense of all others. I discussed these more in depth in my first Gamma World video. These are groups of like-minded individuals who have banded together for mutual survival and prosperity. For example, the ranks of the fit, the Bonapartists. They were founded by Emperor Napoleon I, a mutated bear with delusions of time and place. The ranks of the fit are a revolutionary organization devoted to establishing a worldwide revised code of Napoleon. Their doctrine is an odd mixture of Mein Kampf, Animal Farm, and the Age of Napoleon. Anyone may join, but only mutated animals can hold positions of responsibility in this paramilitary organization. Character advancement in this second edition is measured by status points. These points are then converted into increased rank. Beginning characters have no status or rank, but at the end of each adventure, the GM awards PCs with status points. Status points are typically gained through defeating powerful enemies, donating powerful artifacts to the character's community, which is much the same way gold was converted into experience points in early days of D&D, and accomplishing a mission, such as completing a published or homebrewed adventure, or lastly, through any special rewards the GM deems appropriate. All beginning characters are rank 0. This is the lowest possible rank in the game. Once a PC successfully completes their rite of passage adventure, a must for all beginning characters, they automatically rise to rank 1. All future rank advancement is based on the accumulation of status points. After a rank 1 character accumulates 3,000 status points, they rise to rank 2, erasing those 3,000 status points and leaving any excess. To rise from rank 2 to rank 3, the character must accumulate twice the number of status points it took previously, thus 6,000 points. After reaching 6,000 status points, they achieve rank 3. The cost in status points required to advance continues to double until rank 6. For each additional rank above 6, 50,000 status points is required. There is no limit to how high a character can rise in rank, but from most of my experiences, characters will die before then. But that's fine because the game is a blast. As in real life, enjoy the journey and don't think too much about that destination. Artifacts. Finding powerful magic items is a fun part of the Dungeons & Dragons game. In Gamma World, you want to find powerful technological artifacts created before the fall of civilization. A pretty big part of Gamma World that I failed to discuss in my previous first edition video were the charts used to understand how to use those artifacts of the ancients. In the first edition, one bad die roll and your character might perish. In the second edition, they got rid of the deadly flowcharts and replaced it with a different, less deadly, but much more complex system of opposing die rolls. I'm not going to explain the process here because it's overly complex for what it offers, but basically, pure-strain humans have the best chance of figuring out an artifact without breaking it or killing themselves, while mutant animals should probably just wait for someone else to explain the item to them. Real-world endgame lore. It is commonly said that James M. Ward had met Gary Gygax at a local bookstore in 1974 and ended up being invited to Gary's gaming table. One thing led to another, and James was drawn into tabletop gaming and ended up creating Metamorphosis Alpha. Although Metamorphosis Alpha is frequently cited as the first sci-fi role-playing game ever published, it was in fact the second, having been beaten to press by Ken St. Andre's 1976 game Starfaring. Metamorphosis Alpha was, however, the very first game to ever call itself a role-playing game, while D&D was still labeled Rules for Fantastic Medieval Wargaming Campaigns. Metamorphosis Alpha is a sci-fi role-playing game that concerns a massive colony ship called the Warden, lost in space, and with its crew of robots and mutated biological life forms fighting for survival. The setting combines elements of science fantasy and survival horror, with a focus on exploration and an adaptation in a high-tech yet perilous setting. After creating Metamorphosis Alpha, James Ward went on to create the first post-apocalyptic role-playing game called Gamma World. In creating this game, he cited inspiration from such works as The Long Afternoon of Earth by Brian Aldiss, Starman's Son by Andre Norton, Hero's Journey by Sterling Lehner, and Ralph Bakshi's animated feature film Wizards. If you want to know the full history about James and his creations mentioned here, there's an awesome interview with him discussing all of it in Polyhedron Magazine number 3. The second edition box set included the rules, a large double-sided map, dice, and an adventure booklet with a decent beginning adventure. 2 adventure modules were published for this edition. My final conclusions about this game are good. Now, finding a specific rule in the second edition book can be tedious. While better in most ways than the previous edition, you still need to dig since so much of it seems to have been written stream of consciousness. There's a whole lot of other less important rules that I didn't discuss here, such as the random encounters and hiring and recruiting NPCs. However, if you want to start playing Gamma World, 2nd edition would definitely be among my top recommendations. Regardless of which edition you ultimately decide on, this post-apocalyptic role-playing game is one of my favorite TTRPGs. You can find it on my list of favorites from a previous video that I'll link at the end of this one, so be sure to stick around. I love this game, and I hope you'll love it too. If you're interested in learning it, you could begin with the 2nd edition, or 4th or 7th, depending on your own tastes. You can find some quality scans of most Gamma World products on DriveThru RPG. Although I have all the original printings, I purchased a few print-on-demand copies to check the quality, which I'll cover in a future video. I would use the PODs for actual gaming to preserve the quality of my originals. Second edition does not offer print-on-demand though because of the bad scans, and I don't understand why the people there don't just buy a used copy from eBay, remove the staples, and create good scans. I also couldn't find the alternative version of Gamma World except on pirate sites. And there's a guy on eBay selling a hardbound version of second edition, and I must warn you away from buying this. First, what he's doing is illegal, and I'm surprised he's still in business. Second, the quality is terrible. And finally, he threw in a bunch of weird hand-drawn garbage to pad the size of the book. I figure if he's breaking the law, why not include the 2 modules released for that edition instead of some weird filler pages? Anyway, he's selling illegal garbage. Don't buy it. Right now, if you want copies of the second edition books, your best bet is to find used copies on eBay, but they are in high demand and sell for more than any other edition. There's a lot of good imitators out there, too many to list here. We have several from the 80s and 90s, but there's some more recent editions worth mentioning. I just learned of a Shadow Dark version called Rad World that has potential, if handled correctly, to be great. From Dungeon Craft, I learned of an Easy D6 clone called Wasted Worlds. I'm a big fan of the Easy D6 dice mechanics, and he did a great review, so I'm totally on board with checking it out. And Mutant Future is mentioned a lot, so you should check that out as well. I also own and have some limited experience GMing Mutant Crawl Classics, which is a fantastic retro clone. However, my one critique, and it's a pretty big one from my own gaming taste, is the number of weird dice required to play. It and other DC-related games feel more like an unnecessary gimmick than a revolutionary game mechanic. Don't get me wrong, the DCC games are fantastic, and I'm a really big fan of Goodman games, but their dice mechanic strikes me as excessive and indicative of weirdness for the sake of weirdness. I'd have literally nothing to criticize about the DCC games if it used a simplified dice mechanic. But that's just my own issue, so check it out for yourself to see what you prefer. I have long believed that Gamma World could have easily been one of the world's most popular role-playing games if only it had received the same publicity and care Dungeons & Dragons had. I think my faith in this setting has proven itself with the success of the Fallout franchise, which Tim Kaine includes among its many different influences found in books, movies, and games. I was so impressed with the recent Fallout TV show, I started thinking one of the things Fallout had going for it that Gamma World lacked was the detailed world building and personable backstories. And of course, a very popular video game. At one time, a Gamma World video game had been announced, but it was just fizzled out. And then while preparing to paint a rare Ralpartha Nort and Scar miniature from my collection, I was reading lore tucked away in the modules for 3rd edition. Turns out Gamma World did have some very amazing and very personable backstories in those adventures. I'll be covering all of that in depth with my next Gamma World video, where I'll discuss its 3rd and controversial edition. Also look for my full video about Metamorphosis Alpha when it's available. And wow, if you made it this far, you're amazing. As always, I'm your host Atten here at We Love TTRPGs, and I appreciate your support by liking this video and leaving a comment. I enjoy reading your feedback, unless it's hate posting. This isn't Reddit. That's just not what we do here. Now go check out that French Nerd's YouTube channel to learn about the game he's working on. And thank you so much for watching.